Ah, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So we are bringing folks back. They should come back on their own accord a few minutes after 1 o'clock. So you've got a couple more minutes before we welcome folks back. Okay, we should have everyone back here, coming back here very shortly. So I'm going to turn the conversation over now to Mike and members of the HathiTrust Board of Governors for our next agenda item. And I believe we'll be able to see poll results here coming soon. So thank you all for your response.
And the reason the poll results are tied is because there was not an option to not hear from Mike next year, and that would have won the day. Thanks, Jessica, and thanks again to Jenny for taking part in that last conversation. So I'm going to turn the tables now. I'm going to ask questions, and in this last hour or so, we spent some time talking about where we are today at HathiTrust and where we want to go, and some issues that kind of occupy our thinking. But I've invited my colleagues from the board here today to talk with us and share their thoughts, because theirs are also really critical. The board is responsible for helping set the direction of the organization and really being the voice of the membership. So I am going to ask each of my colleagues to speak for about 5 minutes or so, and we've agreed that they're going to talk in order in which I'll introduce them, and we're going to talk a little bit about where we're going and our aspirations for HathiTrust. So as I've asked them to think about this from the perspective of entering our 15th year, it's time to reassess, or not reassess, but assess what we have done, what we've accomplished, where we should go, and what aspirations each of them have for us, and why are we situated to meet those aspirations. So we're going to hear in the following order from Theresa Byrd, who is Dean of the University Library at the University of San Diego. She joined the Board of Governors this year for a 3-year term. Then we'll hear from Ann Houston, who is Director of Swarthmore College Library since October 3rd, so 24 days and counting. And thanks for being here, Ann, and this is your first year on the board. Beth Namachchivaya from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, where she's joined, I think you joined Waterloo in 2018, is that right? And you joined the board this year. Both Ann and Beth have previously served on the program steering committee. But then there's John Wilkin. John is the Juanita and Robert E. Simpson Dean of Libraries and University Library in Illinois. He was the founding executive director of HathiTrust, and as of December 1st, he will be the new executive director of Lyrasis. So thanks to each of you for agreeing to be here. And I'm going to turn the panel over to you, Theresa.
Thanks, Mike, and hello, everyone. My aspirations for the HathiTrust fall into three categories: developing an app, DEI, and training and marketing. An app for the HathiTrust. At a recent San Diego Circuit Library Directors meeting, we held a discussion about what we thought we wanted for the future of the HathiTrust. And we concluded an app for the HathiTrust that would make digital resources accessible for academic, research, public libraries, and other cultural institutions would be great. For example, here in San Diego County, the San Diego County Public Library allows all citizens in the county to access its Overdrive book app. So that's where our thinking is coming from. DEI is an area that HathiTrust can focus on in the future. I applaud HathiTrust's July 1st, 2020 statement, addressing structural racism at HathiTrust, a commitment to change. But there's still more work to do. I reviewed the list of HathiTrust members, and I didn't see any HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and only a few Haku institutions, Hispanic serving institutions. The inclusion of these libraries' holdings would add unique collections to Hathi's corpus that does not exist in other academic and research libraries in the United States. It is important to include diverse voices and collections in Hathi and to build careers while doing so. I think we all know that finances may be a reason that some of these institutions are missing from Hathi's membership. Perhaps lowering the fee for these institutions for an initial period or seeking foundation support to cover their membership fee is a possibility. Another option to engage these libraries would be for the HathiTrust staff to notify their directors that they have access to books that are in the public domain and to invite them to a webinar to learn more. However, once HBCU and Haku librarians are members, it will be important to involve them in HathiTrust committees and task forces. I believe that in our profession, we complain a lot about being unable to recruit librarians of color. We have recruitment problems because of systemic structures which recreate and impose that don't allow minority librarians to participate in innovative work like that is being done by the HathiTrust. Therefore, there are few librarians of color in the hiring pipeline. We need to practice critical librarianship and anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices in our profession. I'd like to say a few words about training and marketing. Because the HathiTrust membership has become more diverse in terms of institutional types, more non-research libraries, and I think the inclusiveness is wonderful that the founding members were willing to open up to non-research libraries. But the new members were not involved in the development of the digital library like the founding members. So more training and marketing is needed to help these members understand Hathi's array of services. Now, I know the HathiTrust staff does trainings, they do webinars, they are hosting this annual meeting, and they maintain a YouTube channel with videos on topics such as ETOS, Intro to the HathiTrust, and Collection Builder. But perhaps they can also use a train-the-trainer approach to assist newer members or maybe even some older members in learning more about the array and the complexity of services of Hathi. To expand user services, this might mean expanding user services staff, and that would require more of an investment in personnel in the user services department. Additionally, HathiTrust must move forward with the idea in its 2019-2023 strategic directions to develop a strategic communication plan that embodies best practices in storytelling, communication, and public relations. Other future work for the HathiTrust includes controlled digital lending and continue to enhance shared print and copyright review to add more books to the public domain. Of course, ETOS and the accessible text request service are indispensable. Thank you.
Theresa, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate those points. And we're going to have time for conversation and questions. And I want to just remind the audience to please think about questions you want to pose as follow-up for this panel. But while you're doing that, I'm going to hand this over to Anne.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes.
Awesome. So I wanted to start by acknowledging my particular perspective on this panel and also on the board. I come from a growing number of smaller institutions that are HathiTrust members, which includes many liberal arts colleges like Swarthmore. And as we all know, and as Mike described in his remarks, Hathi membership has been expanding, especially due to the new fee model, to include more types of institutions, including institutions of different sizes and from different geographic areas. We're seeing more international members as well. So I think as the membership expands, I think there's a wider variety of aspirations among members for the very specific role that Hathi plays in our sort of portfolio of memberships that we develop. And in addition to the size differences, I think there are also institutions encountering a variety of financial and personnel pressures. So even though I come from a small institution, I come from a pretty well-funded library. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, especially if you look at funding in relation to the size of the student body. So I'm fairly confident that my institution can continue to be a Hathi member, but I'm not sure that that's true for everyone who we've added as members in recent years. So I think that, we can't necessarily take for granted that our membership is going to be as stable as it has in the past. I can see people cycling in and out of membership as the funding pressures might be different from year to year. So while I agree that Hathi is a major success story, I guess my aspiration for it, my primary aspiration for it, is that it provide value to all of its members and a clear articulation of that value that we can say on our campuses that makes it essential to libraries, essential to the members, essential to libraries that want to become members. So in thinking about that essentialness, there are a couple of really specific aspirations that I would have for Hathi going forward. And I think the first one is to enable more members to contribute unique collections. So even small libraries have pockets of uniqueness and depth that have a lot of research value outside of our institutions. So they might be specialized, they might be regional, but they're really unique. And I think one way to think about diversifying and expanding Hathi is to think about how we could help those members add collections when they may not have as much in-house capacity for digitization in terms of staff time and support for workflows. So Mike talked a little bit about this in his remarks, and I know that's not as easy as it sounds, but I think it's really important because I think that's where some of the pockets of things that we can add to the collection are really coming from some of our new members and our smaller members. The second aspiration is I think smaller institutions would also like to see Hathi expand access as much as we can lawfully. Now, I know this is a goal that all of us share and we've been talking about it, but I would just add that for those institutions for which Hathi membership really isn't a sure thing going forward, where our funding might be uncertain, it's a little harder to sell this on our campuses when the access is not as easy to explain. So we get these questions, why can't I get to everything? And we have to answer that question and articulate the value of Hathi on our campuses. So the more we expand access, it has an exponential increase in the value of HathiTrust to campuses that, maybe the funding isn't quite as secure. I would also really love to see Hathi expand support for scholarship, using the collections to help faculty and students, especially to really enhance low barrier access to digital scholarship support. I think there's a lot of potential, for example, for Hadi to contribute to student research, but students don't really understand what Hadi can do. A lot of them know about Hadi, but they don't understand what they can really do with it and the potential of it. And I think to make this happen, I would like to see easy to use tools for digital scholarship available where they can be discovered serendipitously and with little training by Hadi users. Another aspiration I have, and I'm running out of time here, so I'll speak quickly, is that Hadi becomes, as it is already becoming, part of a coordinated digital and print preservation network that serves the common good. So I think smaller institutions are really looking to Hadi not only for digital preservation, but for the ability to allow us to weed, because we do more weeding than large institutions. And when we can really count on that digital surrogate as well as print retention, then that allows us to think more about weeding. So I think that's very important to us. And the point I would just make here is the more Hadi can work with other organizations to really be a part of that network, as we're already doing, I'd like to see even more of that. And then I guess just the last thing I'd say is I appreciate how the leadership of Hadi has become more diverse and reflective of the membership, and I'd like to see that continue. And I'll stop there.
Great, as would I. Thank you, Anne. And so, Beth, why don't you carry us forward?
Thanks, everyone. All of these really thoughtful ideas and aspirations really, help me to understand that as the membership has expanded and as Hadi has become more mature, thinking about the next 5 years probably means that that we will be thinking differently because there are different people in the mix and more people in more different kinds of institutions. Also, are the values that we are developing as a collective as we work together are values that I think we are looking to see reflected both in the content but also in the programs and services that Hadi is making available to its membership. So I have several aspirations, and they really revolve around, I would say, two themes. One of them is about our content and collections, because that is really a core to the existence of Hadi, and it will be as we move forward. And thinking about that in sustainable ways, but also thinking about how we deepen what is our understanding of that, and then what are the ways that we can go about making our content as accessible and repurposable as possible, I think will be important to the way we look at how we sustain our library, because it's not really our membership, it's our library. And so in thinking about that, one of my aspirations is that we all have our own online catalog systems, right? We all have our own local collections. So how much closer can we get to the melding of those local collections with Hadi? Because if we want Hadi to become a household word locally, we have to figure out how we do that. And I know Theresa touched on the point of, training and marketing. That has a lot to do with it, but I think channeling our efforts and our energies, and I'm not just speaking about the HathiTrust staff, but I'm thinking about the way we do that through the governance structure and as members, I think will help us to articulate what is the value proposition to the different audiences.
I think I got it figured out.
To the different audiences that we work with on our respective campuses. There might be someone who doesn't have their mute on, so I'll just remind folks, if you don't have mute on, please go ahead and put it on now. So deepening our understanding of what our collection includes, I think, is a big part of what it means to think about the value. a couple of people have already talked about how collections reflect our collective values, and especially as that relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how institutions can contribute unique content to the corpus going forward. And that's an aspiration that I hold as well. But I think we can also use our available tools and resources and our member strengths to analyze and better understand our content, such as the HathiTrust data mining tools. There are tools that we could probably incorporate into what we do as practicing librarians and as applied researchers every day to understand how we can bring collections of information together to make them much more accessible and usable to students, scholars, and members of our campus communities and our broader communities. I think we do need to begin investing in the future, thinking about sustainability, thinking about digitizing content and shaping the collection by reformatting is one way in which we can do that. Thinking about how we begin collecting born digital scholarship is another way in which we probably need to begin understanding what does that mean for us in the future? How do we go about that? And what is the foundation that we need to extend in order to do that? And related to that, related to the use of our collections is another point that others have touched on, which is exploring lawful digital lending. HathiTrust is an environment where this type of investigation can take place within legal parameters, but also with substantial stakeholder engagement. And I think that could probably include creators, publishers, as well as libraries and our audiences. And the last point that I'm going to touch on relates to engaging more deeply in education. The ways in which people read and absorb content have been evolving around us. And through the Research Center, the text data mining tools and workshet creation and analysis tools have been developed and have been used by a number of scholars, and Hathi has seeded that scholarship, which I think has been wonderful. Hathi has also seeded the development of educational materials, and one very pointed conversation that I had with an educator several years ago was about how to use in classroom experience working with students to actually delve more deeply into research and using methods that you aren't necessarily familiar with. And this faculty member was essentially saying, I don't know how to do data mining, but what I can do is bring it into my classroom so that I can learn how to do this and learn how to do new forms of scholarship by actually learning it along with my class, so that I'm a learner, but I'm also a researcher as part of this group who are discovering, and probably discovering in more facile ways than I can, what it means to read and what it means to read in a digital era. So that's the last point that I'll leave you with, and I want to thank everyone for putting their good ideas on the table as well.
Thank you, Beth. And lastly here, let's hear from John, and then we'll have some conversation.
Good. And thank you, Mike. Well, I want to warn you all, first of all, that I'm going to repeat a lot of the things that Theresa, Ann, and Beth said. And that's not a problem. I think it really should be a reminder to us that convergence in this space is really, really very important. Before I start out, we're talking about my aspiration here. I want to remind everybody that we collectively, set out to be essential shared infrastructure for resource management and service to our users. And we did that in a way where we aspire to do it in a way that these things were tied inextricably and that they were mutually reinforcing. It was a part of our argument in the Authors Guild lawsuit, and our success, I think, depends on that paired set of goals, the sort of resource management and service to our users and the way that they mutually reinforce each other. And I think you can see that in everything that we've been talking about so far. And that should be our North Star. It should be the thing that we use as the foundation for what we do, for where we go. So with that in mind, I want to just to focus on the one thing that I think is important to me, and you've heard it from everybody, and you heard it from Mike in his prepared remarks, and you heard it in the conversation between Jenny and Mike, and it's making progress on lawful access to copyright materials. I want to say here, I'm not talking about something radical or alarming, although some people may see it as radical or alarming, but simply uses that are based on documented ownership of the materials. All of the other things that we want to do, I think, depend on that for their success. So for me, and you've heard it from others, advancing meaningful resource sharing, if we can do it in the context of lawful access, we can do extraordinary things from big and small institutions. We are all in this together. We are no different in that sense. The resource sharing, as we saw going back decades, Hugh Atkinson, the sort of, that it is really kind of a balancing, leveling thing for all of us. We can make considerably more progress on print management if we have lawful access. That is, we can double down on that print management and make better use of print, fewer copies, and make use of the electronic. And, Mike, I want to say, the climate change piece here, we're spending a lot of unnecessary money cooling and keeping low humidity in a lot of high density storage facilities, storing the same things over and over again. So HathiTrust has a role to play in diminishing our footprint. And we can make a lot of progress on developing the collection in deeper and broader ways. As Theresa and Anne have said, really, I think eloquently, this is what we need to do to broaden things. So I want to end with the point here. I think what we're attempting to do, and I say this without any irony, is to subvert the dominant paradigm. And here I mean the historical biases in collection building and access. And the way that we do that, the way that we can do that is to substantially increase inclusion and representation. And I mean that both with regard to the materials that we have and who is in our community. So if we can leverage lawful access to do these things, everybody is benefited there. So audience and materials become something that we can be much broader about. So in that vein, I want to note that greater equity in access benefit small and large, that it's really about all of us, haves and have-nots, and our ability to dramatically increase inclusion and representation depends on our ability to make progress ultimately on lawful access. So that's what I want to end with. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Beth. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Theresa. That was great, fantastic comments. And as John notes, a lot of convergence, and convergence is critical. If there was a lot of divergence here, I'd be kind of worried. John, your last point, I think, is a really important one that I want to just dwell with for a second, and that is that as we talk about and think about how we can work to address equity, to address inequities in structural ways and in large and small. I think your point is really important here, that it's not, if you frame it as what else can we do so that we can be more equitable, right? You're not really hitting the issue, right? You have to look at the center of the problem and address how you ask the question of how is this, how do you choose the problem? How do you do the work in such a way that it helps address the broader structure and helps work against that structure? And I think you're absolutely right there, that if you put that at the center, put these things at the center, you can really make real transformative change. So thank you for ending us on that note. And so I want to invite the audience who has been listening here. We have another 15 or so minutes for some discussion. I want to invite the audience to offer comments, feedback, and questions to the panel or individuals. But while we're waiting for you to offer those, I wanted to ask a follow-up question based on, I think, everyone's remarks, but I think maybe especially on picking up on some things that Anne and Theresa offered at the beginning. And I think Anne, or rather Theresa, you pointed out very rightly so that if you want to see a librarianship community, if you want to see greater diversity in the profession, there need to be opportunities for individuals to participate, to take advantage, to gain experience, to take advantage in prestigious opportunities as well. And I think that is something that we've tried to take seriously, is how we create opportunities for libraries and library staff to be involved in HathiTrust. And you pointed out something that is not contradictory, but also an important point, which is that there are resource constraints, especially, I don't want to say, there are resource constraints at institutions of any size. It doesn't matter what your resources are, you have limited resources to do what the aspirations are that the community has set out for you based on the aspiration, the resources they think you have, right? And so others have noted that being part of collaborative networks is expensive because it requires a fair amount of local staff effort and so forth. So I just wanted to ask if we could think of, of the entire panel, how at HathiTrust can we help think about that? How can we think that through? How can we make it possible for more opportunity to be involved, while also recognizing that maybe not everybody's going to be in a position to do it this week, this year, or right now. And so I'm just going to open that up. I mean, I think this is a central issue that we've been wrestling with for a very long time. So.
Well, I'll take a stab at it, Mike. I think this has been our profession's biggest problem. We have not been able to solve this problem. And I fear that the pandemic, so let me back up just a little bit and say, in our more highly ranked academic institutions in this country, we tend to be a lot more elitist. And by that, then we segment, and it's hard for other people to get in, and different, particularly people of color. And I think the pandemic is going to that's going to continue to be a problem, because the schools who have money, and Anne sort of hinted at that, even though there are a lot of small liberal arts institutions in the HathiTrust, there are Overland Group libraries, and they are better funded and they have strong collections. I worked in one of those institutions, so I know that. And again, the libraries that can afford to participate in HathiTrust and do a lot of things are the ones who are better financed. So that has been our challenge in this profession, is how do we bring other people in? And this is not a HathiTrust problem. It is a national problem for us. We haven't solved it in 45 years, and we keep talking about it. But I think Hathi has done a good job. I served on the nominations committee. I watched the discussions. I've been on another organization's nomination committee. And I think real work is being done now to try and bring in diversity without excluding majority librarians. And I think that's always the balance. So how do we get more librarians of colors? We know that they're in those two pipelines, in that HBCU and Haiku group, as well as some other places. And how do we get them engaged is the question.
Thanks. Anybody else want to follow up on that?
Mike, I would just say, just to add to Theresa's spot on observations, that Renata Ewing has put a comment in the chat about the fact that the collection doesn't contain many recently published volumes, and so as we move forward, having publications, more recent publications that represent more diverse voices, that are helping add to the Hathi corpus in the ways that we all are attempting to do in building our own collections to represent and to incorporate more diverse voices. I think that's one thing that we could aspire to work on, because doing the work in those collections to understand the content and to bring to light the content that represents diverse voices and to understand where we might want to deepen that is something that needs to happen. And librarians are really well placed to do that. But we need to figure out how we move some of that content, how we augment that content as well.
Thanks. I just want to pick up on that comment from Renata too, that I think she points out a really important conundrum, right? That we've taken advantage of the pipeline that we had for the collection, which means it is largely retrospective. And I think the question that I see heads nodding on this, we've talked about it before, is that how do we orient ourselves to become a collection that is also prospective as well, and where the opportunities are for that. And that's just more an observation than specific comment I want to or ask you to respond to. Just checking to see if there's any other questions from the audience here. I have another question I wanted to pose to the group here, which is I think another issue that befuddles me from time to time. And I think that as a leader of an organization of libraries, you also face this. And so as we look at the next several years, one of the things I've been considering is, what is it that we're doing, and what is the right thing for us to be doing going forward? And is there room for all of that? And I really hate asking questions like, what should we stop doing? Or, because that's never really a good question. The answer is really, what's the thing to focus on? But I would want to ask you, as you approach this from your own role as leaders of libraries or organizations, and thinking about it as board members of HathiTrust, how is it we should be thinking about evaluating our impact, our work going forward? The collection is the core of everything we've done. We've acknowledged that, and we've kind of centered our focus on that. But because the collection is so critical, we've often taken on projects and programs that are not that are critical to other aspects of librarianship, and they're really positioned well to address issues around resource management for shared print, around computational access to large corpora as well. But I'm just curious to know, as you think about us looking ahead in the coming years, how do we make sense of the plethora of work that we're doing, and whether there are ways for us to understand what's the right thing to focus on going ahead?
So, Mike, I think one key to this is, which you already do incredibly well, and I think can continue to do, is cooperation with other organizations that are also building this kind of shared infrastructure and services. And, conversations about who can do what, not best, but maybe most efficiently or most effectively. And do we need to duplicate effort that other organizations are doing? And maybe we do. Maybe we're offering something a little bit different. But I'm just thinking about JSTOR's new text data mining service that they're developing, and what it's doing, and how does that relate to the research center? How does our shared print program relate to other shared print programs? Yeah, I know you all are asking these questions, but I think it's really vital to continue those conversations, because we're all paying memberships or fees to all these organizations. We don't want to see duplication of effort. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
absolutely.
that's my first thought.
Mike, it's going to seem like a little bit of a dodge, but I want to just get this out there. I think that one of the things that we can do, if we are more successful in those core things that we've been talking about, you've been talking about, is that we can begin to shift resources. So I think we have spread ourselves too thin. not HathiTrust, all of us, well, HathiTrust, but all of us, right? And so if we can find ways to shift to these at-scale services like HathiTrust, we can then shift resources to doing things differently and doing things in more collective ways. So I say it sounds like a little bit of a dodge because it's not saying give anything up, but it is
Right.
saying that, well, for example, we shouldn't be all of us storing everything in duplicate ways, right? So give up some of that by doing some of the more deeply shared print storage and shift our funds and resources to doing things in better ways at the core there.
Thank you. Others?
I would say, Mike, that John is right. And I think our universities expect us to solve this problem of duplication and collections of stuff. They're really tired of us complaining that we don't have enough funding. And, we've been dealing with this shared print philosophy or projects for a while. And I see a lot of momentum with the HathiTrust, but Pan has been dealing with it, and there's a lot going on. But I would say that it's urgent and it's time for us to solve this problem so we can put resources other places. And I think that's what's expected of us. And we work so well together as a profession. No one does it better. And yet we've been slow in this area to really get things up and running and solve the problem. So it is urgent now after the pandemic.
Thanks. I just want to acknowledge there's a couple of points in the chat that I want to draw attention to and a question I want to follow up on. And I think Scott Walters pointing out, kind of continuing to elaborate on Ann's point about comparing service offerings or similarity of service offerings between multiple organizations. There was another one I lost it here, that there is also the question of how we at HathiTrust can support local institutions, local libraries at local level, and helping their staff become more involved, and what roles we can play in coaching that along. I want to turn specifically though to a question here from Carrie Weaver, who's asking about really the international character of HathiTrust membership. Let's acknowledge we're having this meeting at a time that's really convenient for folks in North America. But Carrie's pointing out that membership is more international than it has been in the past, and wants us to think a little bit about what can we do to address the needs of a more distributed geographically and perhaps culturally distributed membership. And I'm wondering if anyone would like to take on a response to that. Beth, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll just note you're currently in not the United States.
You can put me on the spot, Mike. So I think there are definitely, you can identify cultural differences, whether those are geographically situated or whether it's just a question of being 50 miles north of Detroit. And those really have to do with what is your not just your cultural orientation, but the orientation of the environment where you live and work every day. And so what if we were to look in a really fine-grained way at what equity, diversity, and inclusion means on a daily basis, say in Canada, there are slightly different streams of focus in Canada, and there is perhaps I would say a more defined focus on indigeneity and truth and reconciliation. So some of that has to do with simply developing a sort of a cultural sensitivity lens when we are thinking about what are our core challenges and what does it mean to address sustainability, in different areas of the globe. What does it mean to address equity, diversity, and inclusion? And how does that translate into not only the content that we collect and the ways in which we provide access to it, but how does that translate into how we develop the pipeline of professionals who we want to have the opportunities to work in it? So I would say part of that starts with thinking, sort of having an introspection lens within the membership, thinking about what does it mean for us to do this on a more global basis. Not trying to dodge the question.
No. That's great. Others? Anyone else want to offer a comment? Yeah, John?
I think it's important for us to just to say very bluntly that the problems that we're trying to address here, that there's a significant common denominator, and it's not a lowest common denominator, it's a high common denominator, and it's about cultural heritage, and it's about the use of cultural heritage in scholarship, and that is a global global value, right? And Beth points out rightly that there are different nuances in different contexts, but I think we need to begin to or progress in trying to advance the things that we're doing in that in that more global context. And I say that to say I know it's not easy. Right, that the legal context in Australia, for example, is very different than the legal context in North America, or in the United States, just to say here. But I think it will get easier. So there are things that we can do today, even keeping our servers in the United States, to begin to roll out different legal contexts to be able to explore these things. But fundamentally, this is a hub and spoke model, right? So the HathiTrust is not trying to stand up print storage facilities; it's relying on that distributed infrastructure,
Right.
and so then we begin to think about this as sort of working in different legal contexts, different cultural contexts, different sharing contexts. But we promulgate some of the things that are basic principles that advance those things. Beyond just broad access to the public domain, right?
Right.
And then I think we begin to make some progress.
Great, thank you. And I think I just want to comment here at the end that as we get into the break, that I think one important point here is to really, for me as the leader of HathiTrust, to recognize and really keep thinking about the context in which I'm speaking from. And as Beth points out, who I'm speaking to and what their context is, and finding ways to decenter, if you will, the approach I have taken towards thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion as an individual who's raised in the United States South, and thinking about that very differently in Australia and in Canada, and recognizing something I've always wanted us to do is be very thoughtful about: are we best positioned to solve the problems that are at play in this particular environment? We're not necessarily, and we need to acknowledge that and make sure that we do tend to those things we really can. And there are, as John points out, a lot of commonalities for that. I think, as all of you point out, there's an awful lot of work to be done. And I want to thank you for helping us take inventory of that today and offering some really thoughtful, creative, and just very helpful ideas today. I think the staff has been listening really carefully, and I know the membership has, judging from the comments. So I want to thank each of you for being part of this. And I think I hate to wrap it up, but I think we need to go into here, allowing folks who are in the audience to spend more time talking with each other. And I believe now I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, who's going to talk with us more about the break and the upcoming breakout rooms. So thanks again to each of you.
That is right. We are moving into our second break here, which is 15 minutes long. And I will ask you to please do not log off of Zoom. We are going to take this 15-minute break to get you all into your appropriate breakout rooms. So please do not log out of Zoom during this time. Definitely turn off your camera, turn off your mic, but just don't log off, or we might not get you to the right place when you return. So while you are on break, you're welcome to download some Zoom backgrounds. We've got a link there. And also, we invite you to respond to our second poll question. Would you say yes, no, or maybe to this question? I would attend an in-person event hosted by HathiTrust in 2023. We will see you back here then about 2 minutes after 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Actually, that is no longer true. We are coming back at 2:04, 15-minute break. Thank you all. And if you've got any feedback that you want to share, we will be welcome to receive it at the Jamboard, which is in the chat. Thank you.